First question is that after the promised Messiah, if there is any reformer, and if there is a reformer, what is the relation between this reformer and the Khalifa? السؤال هو من هذا الأخ من المغرب يسأل: بعد مجيء الإمام المهدي والمسيح الموعود محيا للإسلام وجدد الدين وأحياه، هل يأتي بعده مجددين؟ وإذا كان هناك مجددين يأتون بعده، فما علاقة المجدد بالخليفة خليفة الجماعة الإسلامية الأحمدية؟
I have already spoken on this subject repeatedly at different occasions, but I think I should like to repeat the answer because so many people keep wondering about this. The question of Khilafat is mentioned in the Holy Quran. وَعَدَ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مِنكُمْ وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ لَيَسْتَخْلِفَنَّهُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ كَمَا اسْتَخْلَفَ الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِمْ وَلَيُمَكِّنَنَّ لَهُمْ دِينَهُمُ الَّذِي ارْتَضَىٰ لَهُمْ وَيُبَدِّلَنَّ لَهُم مِّن بَعْدِ خَوْفِهِمْ أَمْنًا يَعْبُدُونَنِي لَا يُشْرِكُونَ بِي شَيْئًا. This is Khilafah, which was promised to the followers of Hazrat Muhammad Rasulullah Sallam, the whole Ummah, the entire all of Hazrat Muhammad Rasulullah Sallam, that I promise you that I'll make you Khalifa in this world exactly as I made Khalifa earlier. But who is addressed? Those who believe in Hazrat Muhammad Rasulullah Sallam. So it does not mean that Khalifatullah here means the Prophet or the Messenger appointed by Allah. The promise is made to, not to Hazrat Muhammad Rasulullah Sallam. He's already made a Khalifa, the very best of all the Khulafa, who were Allah's Khulafa. So it's a different Khilafat which is being mentioned as a promise. And how would we know what sort of Khilafat that is? So the earlier people are referred to. Exactly, or like we made the earlier people our vicegerents on earth, our deputies on earth, so also we'll make you our deputies or vicegerent on earth. So who were the earlier people? First of all, Jesus Christ comes in the forefront. Then Moses. And because Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is likened unto Moses in the Holy Quran and also in the Old Testament, so we understand rightly so that this is the reference to the earlier people. Now there we find two types of Khilafats after the Prophet. One type is appointed by Allah directly, and one type is elected by the people under Allah's blessing. One type, which is earlier, was appointment by God of various reformers from time to time, so that the people are kept on the right path. And the second part belongs to the election, but guided election by Allah. And in that there is no separating period in between. The moment a prophet dies, another one takes his place. So in light of this, when we look at the history of Islam, we see that immediately after Hazrat Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, Hazrat Abu Bakr was made the Khalifa. So the promise was kept more so while Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam had just passed away. It is impossible for God to forget His promise at that most important moment in the history of Islam and later on start implementing it. So that is the most important event to help us understand this promise and its fulfillment. So it is Khilafat as it occurred through the instrument of the believers in Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. They got together at the hand of one person. The election as we understand in democracy was not carried out. But the consensus of the whole ummah was a witness, stood a testimony in favor of the election to be under Allah's guidance. Even Hazrat Ali Raziyallahu Ta'ala anhu had to accept it, gave his hand to him. There's no exception whatsoever. So this is the first meaning of Khilafah. But Mujaddidiyat is not known there, no separate reformer comes, none is considered to be needed at all. Then comes the second Khilafat, exactly in the same style, then the third, and at the fourth, that split begins. And when the split begins, then this Khilafat al-Rashida is lifted from earth. Because in this there is a promise of unity. This verse will only be applicable when yabudunani la yushrikuna bi shay'a. They present the scenario of a united people under one God. So the moment they split, they forego their right of the fulfillment of this promise. Now this interpretation which I am presenting to you is fully, entirely supported by the history of Islam as it got unfolded immediately after the demise of Hazrat Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So it also reminds us that earlier people were similar in case of the earlier prophet which was next to Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam in time. That was Jesus Christ. And his Khulafa were elected like this, and according to the promise, they were also official true representatives. And again we see a strange manifestation of this verse in their case as well. Because there again I want to remind you of something which generally people do not know and remain confused. They think that after Hazrat Jesus, Isa alayhi salatu wasalam, the ummah of Hazrat Isa alayhi salam became idolaters and they started believing in Trinity immediately. So whoever was in charge of the ummah at that time, he also participated in that crime of spreading idolatry instead of the unity of God. This is absolutely false and wrong. The first split between in Christianity occurred on this issue. Those who were made resurgence of Hazrat Isa alayhi salatu wasalam, Yaqub and others, they remained firmly adherent, they remained firmly the firm believers in Christianity of Jesus, which was monotheistic Christianity. They adhered firmly to the concept of unity, and that is why the split began between them, the rightful Khulafa of Hazrat Isa, and St. Paul, who acquired Khilafat for himself, apparently claiming that, you know, he was given this title through a vision, which happened in very suspicious circumstances. So I don't want to go into the detail, but I'm telling you that Khilafat of Hazrat Isa alayhi salatu wasalam also remained totally dedicated to the unity of Allah. And Unitarian Christians sprang from them. Abbonites sprang from them. And for a long time in history, they were the custodians of true Christianity, and they are the people who are referred to as Nasara, who offered themselves when it was inquired by God, inquired by Jesus Christ, who would come and help me? They said, Nahnu Ansarullah. So they are referred to as Nasara. They are not Nasranis belonging to Nasira. They are the ones who said, we will help Allah. So the same thing should be expected in Islam. And they were elected by people, but not like democratic election. Someone emerged as a pious man so clearly that when they accepted him, everybody accepted him as their leader. Only those deviated who became mushrikeen. So they had nothing to do with Jesus Christ anymore. So similar things happened in Islam. In the beginning, Islam was unified under the leadership of one caliph. And this is the real promise, Khilafat. Mujaddidiyat is nowhere mentioned in the Quran. Do you find it mentioned anywhere? It is only mentioned in Hadith. The Quran is the fundamental. So, other things are mentioned in the Quran which may be interpreted as a hidden promise of Mujaddidiyat, but as such Mujaddidiyat is not mentioned. So as long as Khilafat remains intact, as long as people in Islam are united under one leadership of Khalifa, there will be no question of any Mujaddid appearing. Because if he comes, he would create split. He will be countering the very purpose of Khilafah. No longer you can say, Yabudunani, La yushrikuna bi shay'an. So any concept of a reformer which comes to create split is unacceptable. So let's now turn to the traditions of Hazrat Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, how he understood this. You know, he, speaking of Mujaddidiyat, what he said, there are the words which are very important. It is not a continuous leadership. The Holy Prophet tells us, what's the exact words?
Inna Allah
yabasu ala rasi kulli miyatin man yujaddidu laha dinaha. That Allah will raise at the head of every century one or some people, man can be either plural or singular, who would revive their deen for them or rehabilitate it. Yujaddidu has all these connotations. But there is no continuity in it. There is a break, an unwelcome break, because during that break things begin to happen which demand resetting of the house. So in Khilafat there is a continuity. So the Quran mentions Khilafat, and after we read that there will be Mujaddidiyat but not continuous. This was a warning to the Muslims, which that Allah had told Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam that Khilafat will not last long in the first part. But it will be rehabilitated, because Islam was forever. And you could not just make do with the institution of Mujaddidiyat, because it is like tayammum to water, to wuzu. So that is why in the end Hazrat Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam again promised, ثُمَّ تَكُونُ خِلَافَةٌ عَلَى مِنْهَجِ النُّبُوَّةِ. And after that no Mujaddidiyat is mentioned. See? So everything is orderly and sensible. So as long as Khilafat-e-Salihah continues in Ahmadiyyat, because it is the continuation of Khilafat of Hazrat Muhammad Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, because the Holy Quran promised Khilafat not temporarily but as a state, continuous state. So in between the last part of the Khilafat and the first part, there was destined to be a break. For that period of break and void, Allah told Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam that I will not leave your faith alone, your religion alone. I will not leave it unprotected. So I have decided to raise people at the head of every century to clean up the house of all that extra material which is added and all the things which have been turned topsy-turvy by the people. So at repeated intervals, the house is to be re-cleaned and re-established and reordered. This is the meaning of Mujaddidiyat. So while Khilafat in Ahmadiyyat continues, and Muslim has been promised that it will continue at least for 1,000 years, inshallah, unbroken. There is no need for Mujaddid, because every time in 1,000 there will be 10 centuries. At the head of every century, a reformer would come and say, I have come to set the house right, this Khalifa has failed. So a new disorder would be created out of order. Right?
That means we cannot say that the Mujaddid is the Khalifa himself?
Could, if there needs be, if during the past some things have happened, but I doubt that. Because every Khalifa stands guard over the values of Islam. You can't say the previous Khalifas, were lax, so there was need an added Mujaddid. So I never take pride in this title at all. Because the first title is that of the Quran. So if in any way, which is imperceptible, Allah requires the need of some rejuvenation of the whole process, revival and re-strengthening, then you may call him to be an additional Mujaddid sort of thing. But if he holds the title of Khalifa, that is the thing which is needed. So one shouldn't
as long as the Khalifa is there,
there's no
everything is
order.
Organized.
Yes,
no
organized.
problem.
Exactly. That's what I mean.
Yes,
So some people try to, write to me by pumping me up, You seem to be the Mujaddid.
The Khalifa is
I said, am I not Khalifa? And was the Khalifa al-Masih Salis, the third Khalifa, not a Khalifa? Then where is the room for Mujaddid?
Yes.
But if you must conceive some room, then you can say that every 100 years a new impetus will be given. And if that is the meaning, which does not derive from any fault of the previous Khalifa, but in itself is a new impetus, then you may call me, because we know that at the head of this century a new impetus is given to Ahmadiyyas. Right?
Yes.